Hola, muy buenas tardes. Soy Bárbara Silva, directora de Singularity U, y quiero darle la mayor bienvenida a esta tercera sesión del día de hoy de Singularity U Virtual Summit. Estamos muy contentos de poder hacer esta transmisión desde la región del Biobío hacia el mundo. Como han podido ver, esta cumbre es distinta, es un formato más pequeño, durante más de 15 días, en sesiones de 45 minutos, 2 a 3 horas diarias, con speakers de clase mundial que se conectan desde Nueva Zelanda, Silicon Valley, Sudáfrica, Dinamarca. Por lo tanto, hoy día estamos a un clic de distancia. Hoy día tenemos un gran speaker, su nombre es Brad Templeton, quien fue el desarrollador de los autos autónomos de Google. Hi, Brad, how are you?
Buenas tardes. Yes, it's good to be here, and I wish I could be there personally.
Yes, that would be awesome. You brought to us an amazing technology with subtitles that is a very, very interesting AI company, right?
Well, the subtitles are just generated by Google, but I've done some special tricks so that while, of course, they will make mistakes because they are a computer, you will see the words appear as I say them, which is something you don't normally see with subtitles.
Yeah, we saw each other last October, and the first time you came to Chile, we went to the Alma Observatory, 5,000 meters in the north of Chile.
In Atacama, it was amazing.
Yes, and it was very cool to see, to look at the past and see how we can be together again, but through online, right? You mentioned in the backstage your story about how did you start your first business on internet. You were the first one. Could you tell us a little bit about that story?
Well, yes, it wasn't just my first business, it was the first business. And it began because in the 1980s, I was publishing comedy online. I was sending jokes around. If you ever wondered how jokes made it from place to place, I was the person doing that. And this started taking over my life, and I had been on the internet for about 10 years at that point, since the late 1970s. And I decided I either had to make my living from it or get off of it. Maybe I should have gotten off of it, but instead I tried to make a business. Now, at the time, there was a rule against doing a business on the internet. It was just academic and for research. And I figured a way to get around that rule, and I convinced the masters of the internet that I was not breaking the rule. And so I was able to make a business selling an online newspaper to subscribers. And I built that even before there was a web, although it then moved to the web, of course.
Amazing. So we feel very honored to have you here sharing your personal story and how a lot of business were built after your amazing experience. So tell us a little bit about what you will talk about today.
Well, later in my career, I moved towards working on self-driving cars. And I worked on Google's car, which was sort of the first pioneering car. And that's become my passion and fascination for many years now. They're going to change the world. I'm about to tell you how they're going to change the world. And it's a very remarkable story. I got invited to work on that car. Now, every big company is in the game, as you'll soon learn.
Okay, so let's start your presentation.
Great. Okay. Let me talk to you about the remarkable changes that are coming to the world in so many fields. Now, the first one that we're going to talk about is the reason that many people got, oh, hang on, I'm looking at the wrong screen. There we go. The reason that people got into this was the ability to save lives. And that's because, let's face it, human beings are not very good drivers. This is just a typical small accident, of course, and you'll notice that I did take this photograph in Chile. But we kill around the world around 1.3 million people every year. That's an absolutely staggering number. Only the coronavirus may beat that now. In the United States, the number every year is about 40,000 people. And the safety agency in the US calculated that that has a cost of about 870 billion US dollars, which is more per mile than the cost of your gasoline, a pretty remarkable statistic. Now, it's very hard to write on the country of Chile, on a map of Chile, so I figured out how to fix that by turning it sideways. But I'll tell you that here, around 2,000 people die every year, and 36% of them pedestrians. That's 3 times the level of the United States per car. So I'm afraid to say that Chileans are not super great drivers. Now, 40% of those fatalities involve alcohol, and robots very rarely drink, so we have an immediate benefit there. But that's not the only amazing number you hear. It turns out that in some cities of the world, this is Houston, more than 60% of the land belongs to cars. We're talking about driveways, we're talking about roads, we're talking about parking garages and so on. That's an amazing amount of our cities that have become devoted to this. I calculate that the total ground transportation industry around the world is worth about 5 trillion US dollars every year. Americans spend about 50 billion hours turning steering wheels, doing this. That's not a super productive activity, and it's one that we may be able to get back. To put it in context, the entire labor output of the United States is about 240 billion hours. That produces, by the way, about 8 billion tons of carbon dioxide and uses about 25% of all the energy in the United States and other rich countries. Here's my favorite number, though. I calculated that the whole human race every year drives about 1.7 light years. Now, how many of you use light years in your work as a unit of human activity? Now, because these numbers are so large, everybody is in the game. Everybody wants a piece of that, all the major car companies and high-tech companies. This, for example, is a project of Mercedes, and you can see on the right one of their concept cars. We'll talk in a bit about how Mercedes has actually backed off a bit. The big car companies have gotten a bit scared and slowed down their development. Tesla is another company you may know. I own this car, and it's a very nice car. It's not a self-driving car, but it is true that a few years ago, you woke up and found that they had added what they call a highway autopilot function to it that would keep it in the lane as you drive, which has occasionally had some negative consequences when people have not understood it wasn't a self-driving car. There is another German company which may have trouble saying, trust your life to our software. Why would we lie to you? Well, of course, Volkswagen went through a big scandal, but that's actually good news for them now because it's forced them to rethink how their company works. It's forced them to reinvent their company, which may actually give them an edge over the others. We also see chip companies. NVIDIA makes many of the graphic chips you find in your phone and in your computer. And they have built self-driving software and now have partnered with Mercedes, among other companies, to get it onto the road. We have a little missing guy. This, by the way, is a vehicle that's running around a park in Santiago in Chile. It is a shuttle. There are several companies making self-driving shuttles. Now, I haven't checked. It's probably not operating right now because of the virus. But these are happening all over the world. There's also some research efforts going on in some of the universities in Chile. And as you probably know, copper mining has a large role in the economy. And already several of the copper mines now have mining trucks which drive themselves. There are also many, many startups playing this game. And this is just a small subset of the startups. I'm going to talk about one of them in a little bit. But many of these startups have already been valued at over $1 billion US, even though they have yet to ship a product. Now, this is a video I took of a car from Apple. Apple is very secretive about what their self-driving car does and everything about their project and everything about their company, really. I've learned one top secret thing about the Apple car. It will only work if you get the newest iPhone, so make sure to do that. The leader, though, was started, this is the project I worked on. The leading company is Google, or rather, its new name, Waymo. Now, Google has driven now for more than 20 million kilometers on real roads and 20 billion kilometers in simulator. And now they actually have these vehicles here. These are minivans. And these minivans are running around Phoenix, Arizona in the United States with nobody in them, picking up passengers and dropping them off as they plan to have a real service due in the near future. This is done with a selected group of families today, but it is a real service. They pay money for it. So if you're wondering when this will happen, well, in some places in the world, it already has. Another company that is important is Uber. Now, Uber has had a checkered history here, but an important realization is that as we move towards self-driving vehicles, we start thinking about the automobile industry as being about selling rides instead of selling cars, the way it has been. Now, Uber is the #1 brand in the world right now in selling rides, and so that's a nice place to be in. Unfortunately for all of us, Uber's project was not very well run, and they hired the wrong people and did the wrong things and ended up in an accident which ran over an unfortunate woman. This set their project back and took them off the road for, well, even till today, they're only back in a very limited way. And many people have tried to figure out exactly what it will mean. It turns out it was mostly human error. It wasn't something unexpected from the software, but nonetheless, the first tragedy on this story. There will be other accidents, of course. Perfection is not a likely goal or a possible goal, and so we have to deal with what happens when machines hurt people. Now, I mentioned the startups, and one of those startups is called Zoox, and they received $1 billion in investment. And 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, they were purchased by Amazon, the giant retailer. Zoox was attempting to build something radical in a completely redesigned vehicle from the ground up, not like a regular car. Here in the leaked image, you see it has wheels that turn in both directions so that it can be much more maneuverable. That was a very ambitious plan, so ambitious that they really couldn't complete it in today's climate of poor funding because of the economic troubles. So they decided to sell themselves, unfortunately, at not much more than they got invested, about $1.2 billion. They sold themselves, and now they'll be part of Amazon. Well, this means Amazon is going to get into this game of carrying passengers, and it also means Amazon will be able to automate all of the delivery and logistics and long-haul trucking that they do using this technology. Nonetheless, the numbers behind this, I hope you will agree, are amazing. And it's one of the biggest opportunities for software and programmers to change the world. Now, the sensors that are used include things like radar on the front of vehicles, laser sensors called LiDAR, which can see the world in 3D, and many others. But I want you to note in this Google prototype vehicle something else. Look inside this car, and yes, there is no pedals and no steering wheel, but there's also no dashboard. It's very simple. There's really nothing inside, because they know that when you get inside, you're probably just going to sit and stare at your phone, which is what you do today when you get into an Uber. So the car of the future may not be what you expect and not look like the cars we have. My other favorite feature of this car, by the way, are the wing mirrors or side view mirrors. Of course, it doesn't have a steering wheel and it doesn't have brakes, so you wonder why they're there. And of course, it's because the regulations require that all cars must have side view mirrors. So step into this world of the future, and Uber has shown us a bit about how it works. It's what you might call mobility on demand. You pick up your phone, you say you want a ride, a vehicle pops up to take you there and takes you there without taking any time out of your day, because you can work and socialize and do video conferences, whatever you want as you move from place to place. So a vehicle that can do that does 4 big things for us. It drives us around, which is of course good. It can, of course, keep us safer while it does that. The vehicles deliver themselves to you, and that's very important. They also recharge or refuel themselves, and they also park or store themselves. When you put all that together, it means a lot of changes for cities and society. It means changes to energy in particular. Right now, of course, we mostly burn gasoline. I have an electric car, but I'm in the minority. And when people buy cars today, they tend to buy these big SUVs that use a lot of gas. But a robot doesn't care about the convenience of refueling. The people who don't like electric cars are worried about how they're going to recharge them. It turns out, by the way, it's not nearly as much of a worry as you think it is, but people do believe it's a worry. But you don't worry about how much fuel or what's under the hood of your taxi or Uber. And because you don't worry about that, you will switch to an electric vehicle, or rather the fleet manager will. And this has the ability to vastly reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we emit. The United States would no longer need to import gasoline, which has a big effect on world politics as well. Also, good news for a country that doesn't have a lot of its own oil resources. I hope many of you have heard of a principle called Moore's Law that was laid out more than 50 years ago, describing how computers get twice as good every couple of years. And we've all seen that happen in the computer industry and with our phones. Well, now that rule of Moore's Law is going to come to transportation, because the computer is going to become the most important part of the car. The wheels and the engine will still be there, but the innovation will be driven by what's in the computer, and that will move at the speed of the computer industry. But it's not just on the ground. The man in this picture is Sebastian Thrun. Sebastian is the man who got me into self-driving cars many years ago, and he also won the first big contest that was won for self-driving cars back in the early part of 2000s. Well, Sebastian has now stopped doing self-driving cars, even though people consider him the father of modern self-driving cars, and he's switched to going in the air with vertical takeoff electric airplanes. This airplane you see here that his company has made can take off like a helicopter vertically, then quickly switches to flying on its wings, so it can be efficient. Well, these vehicles are real. The engineering problems are being solved, and people are still working on many of the political and navigation problems for them. But it's going to also affect how we get around our cities, or how we even get across the mountains if we want to. Here's a little video. That's a different vehicle from Canada. You saw what it did was, it took off vertically, but very quickly tilted forward so that it can fly on its wings. And they claim that vehicle will be for sale shortly for a price not too much more than an SUV. Whether they deliver on that is another story. I know, because when I've been in Santiago, I've ridden many of these scooters, that they were popular, at least before the virus there. This is a picture from Germany, the only place when people return the scooters that they line them up very nicely. But these scooters are, when you do them right, actually very efficient. They are 10 times more efficient than the subway. So for short trips, we can actually make our transportation extremely efficient and also not take very much of the road, which is one of the reasons people like them. Here is a scooter that I'm at a company that's working on this scooter. Here it looks pretty normal, but the secret part about it is that when you're not riding it, it's able to drive itself and deliver itself to you and take itself to where it will be recharged. That means the scooters don't clutter the sidewalks, and you can always find one, which vastly increases how useful they are. I also want to talk to you about something other than moving passengers. Now, everywhere around the world, there's an Italian product which is considered so important that no matter where you are, no matter when it is, you can get it in 30 minutes or less. Of course, it is the pizza, but there are companies, including one I work with, which are producing delivery robots. Small robots, ours go on the sidewalk, others go on the road, which can get you anything in 30 minutes, not just a pizza. What is that going to mean for retailers and how things are bought and sold, and whether you even own things when you can do that? Here is another vehicle from some friends of mine. This one goes on the road, but as you can see, it hasn't got room for a person. It just brings groceries to your curb and sidewalk. Of course, people are also very heavily into doing long-haul trucking to get those goods over long distances with lower cost and faster, because the drivers don't have to sleep the way they do in regular cases. So all of this, as I said, is going to change retailing. Now, retailing in Chile is still very much a personal thing and done in small booths and so on like this. But when you can get anything in 30 minutes, it'll be an interesting question how this will change. You must realize that in many parts of the world, this is already happening. Here in the United States, the Amazon company, which bought Zoox, they offer you many products with just 1 or 2 hour delivery at a very low price. So you can already get this, but it still costs a bit of money. With robots, it's going to be available at almost no additional money. And so the retail stores will have to find new ways of attracting customers. Now, last time I was in Chile, I saw this, and yes, it was at the time the protests began back in October. Now, those protests were about many things, but the reason they officially started was public transit. And of course, we were driving past a bus that we saw that was burned out. You'll see Catherine, who's in the picture here, talking later in this series. So this has, of course, made people wonder, when the virus goes away, how ready will people be to get onto crowded trains and buses again, where you have to grab onto that pole that someone else was grabbing onto and be packed very closely with people. I don't know if you've seen this, but some drivers of Ubers and cabs have put up things like plastic sheets to stop you from worrying about whether the driver has a virus. But unfortunately, you can't be sure about the person who sat down in this vehicle before you and what they did while they were sitting there. There are people trying to fix this. For example, these are robots that emit a type of ultraviolet light. This ultraviolet light can kill the virus if it's exposed for long enough. There are some bands that also don't hurt people. But I believe that there has been a change coming for public transit for some time. And now that people are afraid of it because of the virus, there may be a time where we hasten that change. And that's a change based on self-driving vehicles. Today, public transit uses big vehicles like trains and buses. They have drivers. They drive on a fixed route. They follow a schedule, or mostly follow a schedule. They often get a private track, certainly subways do, and they're run by the city. In the future, I think public transit will move towards smaller or medium vehicles, which, to the surprise of most people, are actually more efficient than big vehicles can be if you use them correctly. There won't be any drivers and there won't be any routes. It'll all be on demand. What you'll do is you'll pick up your phone like an Uber and say you want to get from place to place, and it will automatically put you together with 10 other people in your area who are also going to that rough area, but switch you from vehicle to vehicle in a system like this, where small vehicles match up very quickly for instant transfer to larger vehicles. The larger vehicles are efficient and cheap and can produce very low-cost transportation because they don't need a driver, and get people the same trip they could have had with a private car at a lower price than the public transit does, and with vehicles that can run off to be cleaned in between runs so that you don't need to be afraid of a virus within them. So there are just so many industries that are going to be changed by this. It's a remarkable list. I've covered some of these for you, like the automotive industry. I didn't talk too much about real estate, but if you think about it, the purpose of a city is to be close to other people and to have a short trip to go to your friends, to your work, to restaurants, shopping. When you change how people get around, you change the nature of the city. The city and real estate were defined by the car in the 20th century. And in the 21st century, this is how they will be defined. Car insurance, as it stands today, goes away. Parking actually mostly goes away. These vehicles don't have to park at all. If they're a taxi, they just go pick someone else up. Otherwise, they go and wait for a little while, but they can move at any time. Car repair changes, transit, as I mentioned. Let me actually go in and look at some of these in more detail here. You have some pictures for them. So construction changes because real estate changes, and where we want to live changes, and how we want to live, and whether it needs to be on transportation or not. Shipping changes because we automate all those trucks, we automate all the cars and deliver things. We even will eventually automate the ships. Communications changes because people will now be in their cars wanting to do things like watch a Netflix movie, and they'll want lots of bandwidth in order to make that happen. They won't be listening to the radio as much because their eyes are free. They'll probably be watching more video. The oil industry, as I mentioned, changes greatly because people simply stop wanting oil, and that's a good thing for the world. And that, of course, also means changes to the energy industry as we move to electric transportation. We do need to make more electric generating capacity. Fortunately, solar panels are getting cheaper and cheaper, and there's a lot of optimistic news about how we're going to generate our electricity in a clean way. In fact, the Atacama Desert, where I visited on one of my earlier trips to Chile, is, of course, a great place to get lots of sunshine, and that's already underway. Even medicine changes, because right now, I don't know the number for Chile, but in the United States, there are 4 million visits to emergency rooms because of car accidents, and it will be nice to see those capacities freed up. The list of industries goes on and on. And in fact, it would be hard-pressed for me to think of an industry that's not going to be changed pretty dramatically by a fundamental change in transportation. And of course, mining is one of those industries of particular importance in Chile, and that's already being changed, as I discussed. Food actually changes when you can get food delivered by robot, hot food. This is something that those robots are already doing. It may be that the nature of the restaurant changes as well. And as I mentioned earlier, retailing changes greatly too. These sort of stores will no longer be a place for you just to go and buy something. There'll have to be more than that, because if you just want to buy it, you're going to get a robot to bring it to your house when you're home, when you want it. And the city itself. As I mentioned, we designed our cities and our real estate around these principles. In the real estate industry, they make a joke. They say the only three things that matter in the price of real estate are the location, and the location. Well, the meaning of the location and the meaning of distance change when you change the way transportation works. Now, there are still some big questions to be answered about this field. And so let's go and look at a couple of those. And I would, of course, like to hear your questions in the chat and discuss some of these issues, because I've only touched on some of them when we finish this talk. So the first one is, why are the big car companies pulling back? As I mentioned, companies like Mercedes and BMW and several others have slowed down their self-driving developments after going really full force for quite some time. Well, the truth is, they never wanted to see their industry turned upside down in, overnight at the speed that startups run. They hated it when the newspapers started saying that the future of the car was companies like Google. And so they immediately moved to try and make sure they weren't taken over, even though they didn't have the innovative spirit that startups have. But as things moved a little more slowly than people expected, because this is a very hard problem, they were very quick to say, let's switch to just working on near-term problems, like making things to compete with the Tesla Autopilot, which is definitely competing with them. Here in California, the Tesla electric car is the #1 selling car. It's not the #1 selling electric car. And this is a $50,000 car, and it's outselling all of the cheap cars. This is telling them that they have lots of competition from this, and that's what they've moved to focus on. So they're actually not in a hurry to see the world turned upside down at startup speed. I fear this is the wrong decision. The startups are not stopping. They are slowing down if they hope to sell to big car companies, and they're going to keep continuing and make this technology come out in this decade. Now, there are a number of technological problems still being worked very hard. The biggest of which, by the way, is not doing it, but proving you've done it. Proving that you have made the car safe enough to be out there on the roads, proving it to yourself, proving it to your lawyers and board of directors. This is actually a hard problem that everyone's working on, because you do need to be very safe, and it's hard to measure things that are at that level. One thing that also everyone is working harder on is trying to predict what other people will do on the road. That's one thing that computers are not as good at people at. Some things they're better than people at, but they're not as good at people at deciding what other people will do, what pedestrians will do, what other cars will do. And everyone would like to see the sensing happen more quickly, to be able to know instantly when another car changes speed rather than having to think about it. By the way, humans aren't that quick about that. We take about 3/4 of a second to hit the brakes when someone stops in front of us. And computers can already do that faster, but we want them to do it even faster than that. Everyone also asks, when will I get this? When will I be able to ride in it? Well, of course, as I said, there is that shuttle in Santiago. But my answer to this question is usually a silly one. I say it will happen on June 28th at 4:32 p.m. in 2022. Now, of course, there is no date, and naming a date is a mistake. The when goes back to the thing I just said. It's when people have convinced themselves that they have made it safe enough. They're doing pretty well. The Waymo Google car can be argued now, at least in Phoenix, to be driving more safely than people are. But that is the goal for everyone. Make it as safe as people are, eventually more safe, and that's when they can put it on the road. And that will vary from city to city. So think about these big changes again. The changes to the structure of our cities and the way we live, the saving of millions of lives, the reduction of billions of tons of carbon dioxide, and the making, for the companies who succeed, of trillions of US dollars. All that together is pretty attractive, and that's why very smart people are working on it, and they are working hard, and they are going to succeed, and they are going to change the world. So thank you very much, and let's get into some questions. Barbara, you're muted.
Thanks very much for your amazing presentation. I see you in a different screen now. That is your garden?
This is in front of my house, yes.
Where are you exactly in this moment?
I am sitting in my workroom upstairs, and on the other side of that wall is my porch. I don't know the word in Spanish. My balcony. And then this is in the Silicon Valley.
Okay, great. In what area of Silicon Valley?
I am not very far from the headquarters of Apple Computer, which they have a brand new giant building. It's a big round building, some people call like a spaceship. I go for walks every day, as we must do for exercise during the virus. And we often walk by Apple. And of course, it is completely deserted, which is good because normally they make the traffic here very bad.
I have a question for you. Like few weeks ago, SpaceX launched Falcon 9 to space. Was the first private-public initiative that will change the future of transportation. What do you think about that? How do you envision this new world where cities has a different scene outside the planet? Do you envision something like that?
Well, the project that SpaceX launched is a communications satellite array, which is going to provide high-speed data to everywhere on the world. So even if you're up in Atacama, you would be able to get high-speed data. It's not strictly linked to transportation. Of course, Elon Musk, who runs SpaceX, is also the head of Tesla and very interested in transportation. But it will mean as well that possibly the cars can get this amount of data. Now, it turns out that cars couldn't or should not and do not need to have high-speed data all the time. They like to have data. They like to download new updates on traffic and maps just the way we do. But you don't want your car depending on the network for your safety.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you started the first business you were the first one to start a business on internet. And Elon Musk was the first one to build a private-public project to launch a project into space, right? How that will impact in the future of transportation?
Well, Elon Musk is interested in a very grand type of transportation. He wants to go to Mars. He has set that as his life goal, to take human beings to form a colony on Mars. He has said he wants to move to that colony. He makes a joke and says, I plan to die on Mars, but not on impact. But his transportation efforts are more in Tesla than they are in SpaceX. I mean, transportation for ordinary people. Obviously, transportation into space, he hopes, and many people hope, that we'll be able to someday do tourism into space, that we'll be able to go up and see the amazing views and get the amazing ability to appreciate our planet from space. But this is still not ready.
Okay, thanks, Brad. We have people connected from Peru, Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica. Yes, from many different regions of Chile, Valparaíso, Biobío, the Atacama. So I will take some questions from the people.
I put a photo of Valparaíso that I took when I was there in the talk, just for those people.
Diego Torres is asking, what is the state of the conversion of the shipping industry?
Sorry, which industry?
Shipping.
Oh, you mean like electronic computer chips?
No. Shipping, transportation. Like.
Oh, my apologies. Yes. So a lot's going on there. In the United States in particular, trucks are the way that most cargo moves, and that's, I think, true in many countries today. There's only a few places where rail is still the leader. And trucks are driven by people, and there's a big shortage of drivers, actually. They cannot get people to stay in the truck driving job. And it also takes time to get a truck across the country. The United States is very large. Chile is very tall, because the drivers are only allowed to drive for 11 hours a day. So if the computer could drive the truck, you can move the cargo much faster with more flexibility and at a lower price. And so people want to change that end of trucking. They want to change warehouses. In fact, already warehouses are more and more automated. Amazon, who, as I said, had just bought the Zoox company, 8 years ago, they bought another company called Kiva. And Kiva makes robots that move things in the warehouse. So when you order a package from them today, excuse me, a robot goes and gets the shelf that the package is on and takes it to still a human being who puts it in the box for you. And right now, a human being drives the truck away from the warehouse. But in the future, maybe not. It may be that human being who puts it in the box will be the only one who touches the package.
Thanks very much, Brad. We have another question of Alejandro Cofre. He said, "Dear Brad, if location will be no longer holds true for real estate, what do you think will be the new mantra in real estate?"
Well, I think it will still be true. Look, people will still care about location, but they will care differently about it. Because, for example, they'll be able to get almost anywhere in their city very easily, and therefore the location for stores, the location for a movie house, these will all no longer need to perhaps concentrate in a centro, for example. It might be possible that there is less value in building a downtown. Many cities already are what they call polycentric. That means they have really more than one downtown. And you don't necessarily go to the other one, you go to the one that's close to you. This phenomenon might very well expand. We saw as the car arrived in the 20th century that the suburb was created, and everyone started moving out to the suburbs. They used to live in the town, they would move to the suburbs in many countries. Well, here's the funny thing is it may actually reverse that. One of the reasons that people move to the suburbs is not for themselves, it's for their children. They wish to have a big yard, they want a bigger house, they want a safer street, and they want this, and they want a good school. They want this for their children. It's not because they want to have to get into the car to go and drive and buy a liter of milk, right? Nobody looks for that. But in the future, children may become as mobile as adults. Maybe not 5-year-olds, but you will probably trust your 10-year-old to go out and ride to school in a vehicle like this, which would mean that possibly the school doesn't have to be as close, or their friends don't have to be as close. Or it may mean that you feel fine living in an interesting place to walk and live. Now, I also mentioned briefly the flying vehicles. They will also make a huge change. There are places, I mean, in Chile, you have mountains, I know this, and suddenly every place in the mountains will be reachable. Even the top of the hill will be somewhere a person could have a house as long as they could get water up there, because you can get electricity from the sun, and you would need to have, of course, a sewer, but a tank. But if you can get water, then you could fly. And so all of those places in the hills, if we allow people to build there, they might build there. So this will be another dramatic change, because as I say, these flying vehicles, they're going to start off being expensive, but eventually they're not going to be that much more expensive than a car. So this will change where people live.
Thanks very much, Brad. We have another question from Sergio Jovanovic. He said, "Awesome presentation, Brad. Thanks. What will be needed from legislation moving forward as these specific technologies advance?"
Well, so many governments in the early days of this already passed laws just to make sure it would be legal to develop the vehicles and to test them. And they are still working on how they want to write the laws about how they will be deployed. Now, I actually don't think they need to write very many laws, because it turns out it's already illegal to hit people. Right? You cannot have accidents. That's already illegal. And the companies who are doing this, They saw what happened to Uber, where they had to shut their project down for almost 2 years when they had this accident. So they're already very afraid, and they're very motivated to stay safe. So it's less clear that we need a law specifically saying be safe, because we have a law already that says be safe, and it applies to everyone on the road. So mostly the companies have been looking for the governments to just make the path clear, to make it obvious what to do. For example, many of the existing auto laws require things like those side view mirrors I showed on that car. They say you have to have that on a car. And so you can take away those rules, the rules that say there has to be a steering wheel, the rules that say there have to be pedals. Another rule you can take away is we actually want someone, if they are out drinking, to not drive themselves home. We'd like them to call one of these and go home. We want to make sure that that's legal, so that it's not legal for them to drive, but it is legal for them to ride in one of these vehicles. And some of the initial rules weren't too clear on that. So governments around the world are trying this, and it's very interesting because people know some of the things I said. They know that the automobile industry is about to change, and there will be old companies that will die and new companies that will thrive. And so it may be that the auto industry is no longer centered in Detroit or Yokohama or Stuttgart, right? It may move to another place, and everybody would like to be that place. And so many of the governments are saying, please come and do it here. We will make the laws to make it possible to do this.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brad. I will take another question. It's from Roberto Luis Belloni. How do you envision public transportation in the post-pandemic world?
Well, I did touch on that a little bit, of course, and it is a challenging question, and it's because even with a private taxi, you are worried about getting into it because maybe the person who just got out of it was coughing all over it, and you don't want to sit down there. So, but public transportation like a bus, I don't know what it's like in Chile, but here the number of people riding the bus and the subway is down to 1/10 of what it was before the pandemic, and I don't know it's the same there. I know that in Santiago there are far fewer people who own cars, and they don't have a lot of choice. But those are the only people who are on the public transportation today, are the people who have no choice. Well, I predict that it will be possible to ride in a self-driving taxi for a price that is maybe as low as about 25 American cents for a mile, so call it 15 cents for a kilometer. And 15 cents for a kilometer, well, this is cheaper than the bus for many trips. And that doesn't require any subsidy from the government. That would be a private price. If they had a subsidy from the government, it could be very cost effective. That's a private car. If you're willing to ride in a van with other people, you will pay less. And that is very good news for people. However, we're not here yet, and we're still some years from having this. However, the smaller the vehicle, the easier it is to make compartments in it so you don't have to be touching or breathing other people when you're on board. The easier it may be to have it cleaned on a regular basis, which you want to do. And of course, new vehicles will also include these ultraviolet sanitation, and they'll also include possibly surfaces that are easy to clean in order to make it so you can trust your health.
Okay, thanks very much, Brad. Integrating by the last question, Mr. Lolissimo, Roberto Guerra said, Brad, in your opinion, how can emerging markets and Latin American economies take advantage of this pandemic challenge?
I see my translation got very far behind me there, so it gets caught up now. So say, how can emerging markets? Well, one way that they can do that is, as I say, some countries have declared they want to be open to development, and so they're pushing for the technology to be developed there. However, I must be frank, people are first starting to do this in the countries where they are and in the countries where they feel they can make the most money, and that is the richer countries. It will take time before it deploys there. Another thing, though, that is an opportunity is the big companies like Mercedes and Google and Amazon. They are focused on places like United States, China, Japan. And so they're not applying to do it in Latin America yet, which means there's an opportunity for Latin American companies to address the Latin American market. In India, we're seeing Indian companies working on this technology because they're the only ones trying to solve the very difficult problem of driving in the chaotic traffic they have in India. So this is an opportunity, and I'll tell you why. Because once you've built this technology, you cannot simply deploy it all around the world. You have to go one city at a time. Every city you go to, you must work out the particulars of driving in that city. You must work out, you must be friendly with the mayor. You have to do all these things, and you must also buy a large number of cars to deploy as a fleet. And even Google does not have the money to do that all around the world all at once. So this means that they will do it one city at a time. And this means that it could be that no company will want to do Santiago first, except perhaps a Chilean company or a Latin American company.
Okay, I will take the last question, Brad, from Mario Ortiz, and he asked, what the most challenges for financial industry about the loans and insurance cars?
Well, insurance companies do a few things. They study risk, so they try and understand risk, and then they have actuaries who figure out how humans have accidents, and then they pool risk together. They combine the risk from many people so that they can burden the cost with the premiums from others. But if you are a company like Google and you're running a self-driving car fleet, you understand the risk of your vehicle much better than the insurance company because you built it and you test it. They don't understand how it works. And you are so big that you have more money than the insurance company, and you will pool the risk together. So what this means is you don't really need the insurance company. You do what's called self-insurance. So this is unfortunate for the companies that sell automobile insurance if it moves to fleets. The banks also, of course, will not be giving a car loan for the purchase of these fleets. These fleets will be financed in other ways. The banks may still finance them to some degree, but it won't be through the usual car loans they have today. And I apologize because it looks like the subtitle system has fallen behind and isn't doing as good a job.
Okay, we know that this technology is in process to be developed, but the positive things that you are testing with us, that it's a great advantage from Google and their AI system. So it's a working process technology, and I would like to thank you very much for your presentation, for your insight, for sharing your knowledge, and I hope to see you very soon in Silicon Valley or in South America and Chile.
Very much so, and I'm saddened that I didn't get to come down to Chile. It's a beautiful place, and I would love to return. And thank you for having me here today. And I'll recommend to everyone to tune in a couple of weeks and see Catherine, who also lives in this house, so I am fond of her. And she will also tell you about some amazing exponential things.
Thanks very much, Brad. Los quiero dejar muy invitados a la sesión de mañana, que va a ser 100% en español para aquellas personas que no se pudieron conectar hoy día por el tema del inglés. La presentación de Brad y de Chris va a estar en nuestro sitio web con subtítulos, así que las vamos a compartir a todas las personas que se suscribieron al Summit virtual. Y mañana tenemos a dos invitados estelares, Hernán Orellana, quien es director de varias empresas, fue CEO de Microsoft en Chile, y él nos va a hablar cómo liderar organizaciones en tiempos de pandemia y el rol que juega la tecnología en ella. Y también tendremos a Leonardo Maldonado, quien ha tenido un rol muy importante en Sistema D en América Latina, y él va a hablar sobre la obsolescencia de la gobernanza global. Hoy día les vamos a hacer llegar los links para que se puedan conectar mañana. Que tengan un excelente día. Muchísimas gracias por haberse conectado. Quiero agradecer a nuestros partners que han hecho este evento posible.